It began with promises, but ended in fire. A distant government, a vast and wild frontier, and a dream that spiraled into war. In the early 1800s, Mexico welcomed settlers into its northern province, what would become Texas. They came with wagons, families, and hope. But hope, unchecked, can turn to defiance, and promises once broken can ignite revolutions. What drove these settlers, many of them Americans, to rise against the very nation that gave them land? Was it oppression? Was it freedom? Or was it something far more complex? This is not a simple tale of good versus evil. It is a collision of cultures, a clash of empires, and the birth of a new republic soaked in blood. It is the story of how Mexico, just emerging from its own revolution, lost control of its northern frontier, and how a patchwork army of ranchers, rebels, and renegades dared to challenge one of the strongest military powers in the Americas. From the fall of the Alamo to the triumph at San Jacinto, from whispered conspiracies to open rebellion, the Texas Revolution reshaped borders, identities, and the future of an entire continent. This is the untold war for Texas, and the cost of its freedom was everything. To understand the Texas Revolution, we must go back, far beyond the first gunshot, beyond the smoke of San Jacinto, beyond the echoes of defiance at the Alamo. The road to revolution did not begin with war. It began with land, with ambition, with two nations, both young and restless, colliding on a vast and volatile frontier. In 1821, Mexico achieved its independence from Spain after a bloody, exhausting war that lasted more than a decade. But independence brought not stability, only uncertainty. The Mexican Republic was new, divided, and fragile. Its territory stretched from the Yucatan Peninsula to the deserts of California. One of its most vulnerable regions was Tejas, what English speakers would call Texas. Texas was enormous, but it was empty of settlers. Few Mexicans lived there, and the land was under constant threat from powerful native tribes, especially the Comanche. Mexico lacked the money and manpower to secure it. To hold the land, the government turned to colonization. It offered land grants to foreigners, most notably Americans. These immigrants would be the ones to populate, develop, and defend the province. Under this system, impresarios were granted authority to recruit settlers. The most famous of them was Stephen F. Austin. He brought hundreds of American families into Texas, establishing the foundation of what would become Anglo-Texan society. These settlers were promised land, vast stretches of fertile, cheap farmland. In return, they agreed to certain conditions. They would become Mexican citizens, they would convert to Catholicism, and they would obey Mexican law. But on the frontier, law and promises often gave way to practicality. The settlers brought their language, their religion, their customs, and their slaves. Many were from the American South. They depended on enslaved labor to work their land. Though Mexico formally banned slavery in 1829, it tolerated exceptions in Texas, hoping not to anger the settlers. Over time, the American presence exploded. By 1830, Anglo settlers outnumbered native-born Mexicans in Texas by as much as 4-1. Few followed the requirements of citizenship. Fewer still spoke Spanish. What was intended as peaceful immigration began to look like infiltration. Mexico became alarmed. In 1830, the government passed the Law of April 6th, a sweeping attempt to regain control. The law prohibited further American immigration. It imposed customs duties. It canceled unfulfilled land grants. It authorized the building of new military outposts in Texas. To many settlers, it felt like betrayal. They had come with Mexico's blessing. Now they were being treated as enemies. Discontent grew. Yet the settlers were not united in revolution, at least not yet. Many still hoped for reform, not independence. They wanted the Constitution of 1824 restored. That Federalist Constitution had promised state autonomy and local control. But in Mexico, the winds were shifting. Power was consolidating. The central government was growing stronger. Then came Antonio López de Santa Anna. Santa Anna rose to prominence as a general and political opportunist. He presented himself as a liberal reformer but quickly revealed himself as something else entirely. In 1834, he abolished the Federalist Constitution. He dissolved Mexico's Congress. He eliminated state governments. He declared that all power would be centralized in Mexico City. Resistance would not be tolerated. To Texans, both Anglo settlers and many Tejanos, this was tyranny. Their voice had been taken. Their autonomy had been erased. The dream of being part of a free Mexican federation was dead. What remained was dictatorship. In 1833, before Santa Anna's full seizure of power, Stephen F. Austin had traveled to Mexico City to petition for separate statehood for Texas. He waited for months, met with indifference, and grew frustrated. Eventually, he wrote a letter to leaders in Texas urging them to begin organizing on their own. That letter was intercepted. Austin was arrested, jailed without trial, and held in prison for over a year. When he returned to Texas, he was changed. The man who had once preached loyalty to Mexico now spoke openly of resistance. He had tried diplomacy. Now he was ready for war. Meanwhile, General Martín Perfecto de Cos, Santa Anna's brother-in-law, was sent to Texas with orders to assert federal control. He arrived with soldiers, issued arrests, and fortified military positions across the region. In towns like Anahuac, San Felipe, and Goliad, tensions erupted. Local councils were dismissed. Militias were formed. Weapons were hidden. Voices of protest turned into vows of defiance. But revolution is never simple. Texas was not unified. Some settlers wanted independence. Others wanted to fight only until the Constitution of 1824 was restored. Some Tejanos joined the resistance, while others remained loyal to Mexico. In the shadows, many Americans, volunteers from the southern United States, crossed the border to join the coming fight, drawn by the promise of land and a cause that echoed the American Revolution. Still, this was no mirror of 1776. The settlers were not fighting for universal liberty. They were fighting for property rights, self-governance, and, in many cases, the ability to keep the institution of slavery alive. The revolution was complex, tangled in contradictions. Tejanos like Juan Seguin and José Antonio Navarro stood shoulder to shoulder with Anglo rebels, risking everything. Yet others, left out of the vision for a future republic, had no voice. Enslaved people, indigenous tribes, poor Mexicans. Their fates would be determined by the outcome of a war they did not choose. By the fall of 1835, the fires of rebellion were fully lit. Cos had fortified San Antonio. Settlers across Texas began organizing for open revolt. Delegates gathered in conventions, debating the path forward. Some still urged patience, others called for immediate war. The tide moved fast. Men who had once sworn loyalty to the Mexican flag now stood ready to fire upon it. Then came Gonzales. In October 1835, a small company of Mexican soldiers arrived in the town of Gonzales to retrieve a cannon that had been loaned to the settlers for defense against native raids. The settlers refused. They raised a homemade flag bearing 4 bold words, "Come and take it." A skirmish followed. The first shots of the revolution were fired. Mexican troops withdrew. What had been a political crisis was now a war. News spread quickly. Volunteers flocked to join the fight. Militias seized garrisons at Goliad and other key towns. Texian forces laid siege to San Antonio, where Cos had taken shelter. Revolutionary committees formed across the province. The revolution was no longer theory, it was action. But even now, independence was not official. In November 1835, a consultation was held in San Felipe. Delegates formed a provisional government. They declared that Texans were fighting to uphold the Constitution of 1824, not yet for full separation. They established a regular army, appointed Sam Houston as commander, and called for aid from the United States. Still, the tide was moving. Fast. The Mexican government saw no distinction between rebels and separatists, and Santa Anna had made his decision. He would crush the rebellion by force. The army was raised. Thousands of soldiers would march north. The full weight of the Mexican Republic was coming to Texas, and with it, vengeance. The revolution had crossed a threshold. There was no going back. The seeds of war had become harvest. The road to independence would run through blood, and as the smoke rose over the Texas plains, the fate of a republic not yet born hung in the balance. Revolutions do not erupt overnight. They burn slowly, sparks turning into flame, flame into fury. In Texas, the revolution began with a single cannon and 4 defiant words: "Come and take it." October 1835. The Mexican garrison at San Antonio de Bexar sends a small detachment of troops to the town of Gonzales. Their mission is simple: reclaim a 6-pound cannon loaned to the settlers years earlier. But in a world on the brink of rebellion, nothing is simple. When the soldiers arrive, the settlers stall. They refuse to hand over the cannon. Instead, they call in reinforcements from nearby communities. In a matter of days, over 100 Texian militiamen assemble. Facing just 100 Mexican troops, they prepare for a stand. Before dawn on October 2nd, the Texians cross the river and open fire. The Mexicans, caught off guard and outnumbered, retreat. There are few casualties, but the meaning is clear. The Texians have resisted Mexican authority with open violence. The revolution has begun. News spreads like wildfire. Volunteers surge across Texas. Settlers abandon their farms to join militias. From the pine forests of the east to the dusty plains of the west, men gather under the banner of resistance. They are poorly trained, poorly equipped, but full of purpose. In Goliad, Texian forces strike again. A detachment under George Collingsworth attacks the Presidio La Bahia. The garrison falls quickly. The Texians seize supplies, weapons, and a strategic position on the road between the coast and San Antonio. Every victory fuels the cause. And now, all eyes turn to the key stronghold of central Texas, San Antonio de Bexar. Inside Bexar, Mexican General Martín Perfecto de Cos has fortified his position. With around 1,200 troops and defensive walls, he believes he can hold the city. But Texian forces are coming, commanded by Stephen F. Austin, Edward Burleson, and James Bowie. The Texian army camps outside the city. Among them is a tall, imposing frontiersman named William Barrett Travis, and a legendary knife fighter, fresh from the American wilderness, Jim Bowie. Both men will soon become icons, but for now, they are just part of a growing rebellion. From mid-October to early December 1835, the Texians lay siege to Bexar. For over a month, the two sides exchange fire in the streets. Disease, cold, and hunger spread in the camps. Leadership changes hands. Morale wavers. In early December, the Texians launch a bold assault. They enter the city house by house, street by street. Urban warfare unfolds, chaotic, brutal, personal. Mexican troops fight from rooftops and windows. Texians advance through alleys and rubble. On December 9th, after 4 days of fighting, General Cos surrenders. He agrees to withdraw all Mexican troops from Texas. Bexar has fallen. Texas, for the moment, is free. The victory is intoxicating. Texians believe the war is over. They believe Mexico will not return. They believe independence is within reach. They are wrong, because far to the south in Mexico City, Santa Anna has received the news, and he is enraged. To him, the rebellion is treason, an insult to his authority. a threat to the very fabric of his nation. He does not plan to negotiate. He plans to annihilate. Santa Anna orders a massive army to march north. Thousands of troops, organized, disciplined, and ruthless. They will retake Texas, crush the rebellion, and make an example of anyone who defies him. Among Texian leaders, divisions deepen. Some want to declare full independence. Others still hope to restore the Constitution of 1824. At the consultation held in November 1835, a provisional government is formed. Sam Houston is appointed commander-in-chief of the regular army. But the army barely exists. Most Texian forces are volunteers, independent, untrained, proud, and difficult to control. Still, they spread across Texas, occupying strategic points. In Bexar, about 100 Texians remain to defend the city, now centered around a former Spanish mission, the Alamo. They believe it is a stronghold, they believe it can be held, and they are about to be tested. Meanwhile, reinforcements and volunteers begin arriving from the United States. Some are idealists, some are adventurers. Some come for land, for fame, for profit, but they come. Among them is a Tennessee congressman turned folk hero, David Crockett. Wearing a coonskin cap, carrying a long rifle, he arrives in Texas seeking a fresh start. He joins the garrison at the Alamo. He does not know it yet, but he has stepped into the heart of history. In January 1836, command of the Alamo passes to Lieutenant Colonel William Barrett Travis. Young, ambitious, and principled, he is determined to defend the fort at all costs. But tensions rise between Travis and Jim Bowie, co-commander of the garrison. Bowie is popular with the men, tough, rugged, and charismatic. Travis is disciplined and formal. The two clash. But when word arrives that Santa Anna is approaching with thousands of soldiers, they unite. The Texians at the Alamo begin preparing for siege. Walls are reinforced, supplies are rationed, messages are sent begging for reinforcements, but none come. By February, Santa Anna crosses the Rio Grande. His army moves relentlessly northward, burning towns, seizing roads, flying the red flag of no quarter. He arrives in San Antonio on February 23, 1836. He demands surrender. Inside the Alamo, Travis answers with a cannon shot. The siege begins. For 13 days, Mexican forces surround the fort. They bombard it with artillery. They wait, pressuring, tightening the noose. Inside, less than 200 defenders prepare to make their stand. On March 6th, before dawn, Santa Anna launches a full assault. Waves of soldiers rush the walls. The defenders fight with muskets, pistols, and knives, but they are overwhelmed. Within 90 minutes, the Alamo falls. Every defender is killed. Travis, Bowie, Crockett, all dead. The bodies are burned in a mass pyre. Santa Anna sends a brutal message. This is the price of rebellion. But he miscalculates. Across Texas, the fall of the Alamo has the opposite effect. It does not break resistance. It fuels it. Remember the Alamo becomes a cry for vengeance. Texians, once divided, now rally together. Farmers become soldiers. Volunteers flood the camps. The revolution transforms into a war for survival. But tragedy strikes again. 3 weeks later, at the town of Goliad, another group of Texian soldiers is captured by General José de Urrea. They are prisoners, surrendered under terms of mercy. But Santa Anna overrides those terms. He orders them executed. Over 400 prisoners are marched out, shot, and their bodies burned. It becomes known as the Goliad Massacre. The message is clear. Mercy is not coming. Now, there is no middle ground, no compromise. Texians understand what is at stake. If they lose, they will die. If they win, they will be free. The early sparks have become a wildfire. A full-scale revolution is underway, and in the east, a new army is forming. led by a man who has yet to make his move. Sam Houston. His moment is coming, and when it arrives, everything will change. The fires of rebellion had been lit, but it was not yet a revolution. It was still a question, a fragile dream. And as spring arrived in Texas in 1836, that dream teetered on the edge of extinction. The Alamo had fallen. Goliad was a graveyard. Santa Anna believed the uprising was all but finished. He had marched deep into Texian territory, confident, ruthless, and with the force of a professional army behind him. His campaign had been one of terror: crush the rebels, scatter the civilians, and erase the idea of independence from the land. And for a moment, it almost worked. Across the Texian settlements, fear reigned. News of the massacres spread like wildfire. People abandoned their homes, their livestock, their possessions. Whole towns emptied overnight in what became known as the runaway scrape, a frantic, desperate flight to the east. Mothers carrying children, elderly men walking for days, wagons filled with what little could be salvaged. The ground shook not from cannons, but from the collective panic of a people fleeing for their lives. Amidst the chaos, General Sam Houston made a decision few understood. He ordered a retreat. To the angry volunteers in his army, it felt like cowardice. To the refugees watching their homes burn, it looked like abandonment. But Houston was not running. He was waiting, biding time, training the men. He was outnumbered, under-equipped, and many of his soldiers were barely trained. To face Santa Anna's hardened army head-on would be suicide. So he gave ground. He watched, he calculated. He listened to the land, to the people, to the wind itself. But Santa Anna saw only weakness. He misread Houston's caution as defeat. And driven by arrogance, the Mexican general made a critical mistake. He divided his forces. Believing the rebellion on its last breath, he left his supply lines stretched, his troops dispersed, and his elite units separated from one another. He had victory within reach, but he reached too far. By mid-April, Santa Anna established camp near the San Jacinto River, close to the modern-day city of Houston. The terrain was swampy, dense with brush, and hemmed in by the river on one side and Buffalo Bayou on the other. A risky position for any general. But Santa Anna saw no danger. He believed the Texians would not attack. He believed Houston was still retreating. He believed fatally that the enemy had no fight left. Houston, meanwhile, had reached his breaking point. With every village burned and every Texian executed, the pressure mounted. The time for waiting was over. His army had grown to around 900 men, still small compared to Mexico's power. But now they were hardened by the long march, united by shared loss, and enraged by the blood spilled at Goliad and the Alamo. Houston had been silent, but the storm was coming. As he marched toward San Jacinto, he burned bridges behind him, literally, so his men could not retreat. This battle would be final. Either Texas would be born here, or it would die in the swamp. On April 20th, 1836, the two armies first made contact. A brief skirmish broke out between cavalry units. Texian Private Mirabeau B. Lamar, charging with reckless bravery, rescued a wounded comrade under fire. He would later be promoted on the field for his valor, but the real clash was still a day away. Houston knew the land well. He surveyed the Mexican camp, saw the vulnerable positioning, the lack of fortifications, the carelessness. Santa Anna had allowed his men to rest in the open, to bathe in the sun, to eat late into the morning. There were no scouts in the woods, no pickets in the tall grass. The enemy had grown complacent, and so Houston prepared to strike. On April 21st, around noon, Houston's army formed behind a ridge near the Mexican camp, out of sight. They waited, rested, ate quietly. And when the time came, Around 3:30 p.m., they began their silent advance. The Texians moved in tight formation, hidden by the terrain. They carried not just muskets and rifles, but rage. They did not carry fear. And as they approached the Mexican camp, they unfurled their banner, an improvised flag painted with a single phrase, "Remember the Alamo." Then came the second banner, "Remember Goliad." Those were not just words, they were vows. And when the Texians reached shouting distance, they opened fire. The Mexican camp exploded in confusion. Soldiers scrambled from their tents. Officers shouted orders that could not be heard. Artillerymen reached for matches too late. The Texian line surged forward, a wall of fury. No hesitation, no quarter. What followed was not a battle. It was a rout. In just 18 minutes, the Mexican army collapsed. Hundreds were killed where they stood. Others tried to flee into the marshes, only to be gunned down, trampled, or drowned. Horses broke free, cannons were abandoned, and flags fell into the mud. The Texians, driven by months of frustration and horror, showed little mercy. By sunset, over 600 Mexican soldiers were dead. Hundreds more had been captured. Only a handful escaped. Texian losses: 9 dead, 30 wounded. But the true moment of victory came the next day. A group of Texian soldiers found a man hiding among the reeds, dressed as a common private. He begged for mercy in Spanish, but his identity was quickly uncovered. It was Santa Anna, the man who had ordered the executions at Goliad, the man who had declared no prisoners at the Alamo, the dictator of Mexico, now a prisoner of the Texian army. He was brought before Sam Houston, who, wounded in the leg during the battle, received him seated beneath a tree. Houston could have ordered his execution on the spot. Many demanded it, but Houston, ever the strategist, knew better. Santa Anna was worth more alive than dead. Within days, Santa Anna was forced to sign the treaties of Velasco. In these documents, he agreed to withdraw all Mexican troops from Texian territory and recognized the independence of the Republic of Texas. Mexico, of course, would later refuse to honor these treaties. They would claim Santa Anna had signed them under duress. But the damage was done. The Mexican army retreated. The war, for now, was over. The victory at San Jacinto was total. And yet, it was only the beginning. Texas was now a republic, but it was a fragile one. The soldiers celebrated, but the leaders began to debate. Who would govern? What kind of laws would be written? Would slavery be allowed? Would Texas join the United States or stand alone? Sam Houston, hailed as a hero, would become the first elected president of the republic. But he would inherit a nation exhausted, chaotic, and surrounded by enemies. Still, in that moment, none of that mattered. For the first time, the people of Texas had their own flag, their own soil, and a chance, just a chance, at freedom. The Battle of San Jacinto was not just a military turning point, it was a psychological one. It shattered the myth of Mexican invincibility. It elevated Texas from a rebellious province to an independent nation. And it carved into history a moment where courage, timing, and the fire of vengeance changed the fate of a continent. But the cost was enormous. The fields still held the bodies of the fallen. The town still lay in ash. Families had been torn apart, villages erased, entire generations of memory lost to fire and exile. And the questions were only beginning. Would the Republic of Texas survive? Would Mexico return for revenge? Would the United States embrace this new republic or exploit it? One battle had been won, but the war for identity, for recognition, for security, that war would rage on in politics, in diplomacy, and in memory. And through it all, the people would remember. The cries from the Alamo, the executions at Goliad, and the moment when, for 18 minutes on a muddy plain, they seized history with their own hands. The revolution had burned bright. Now the ashes would settle, and the struggle to build a nation would begin. The smoke of San Jacinto had barely cleared when a new storm began to rise. One not fought with muskets or sabers, but with laws, loyalties, and lies. For though the Republic of Texas was born in battle, it would be forged in the fires of chaos. Santa Anna was a prisoner, Mexico's army was in retreat, and in the eyes of the Texians, victory had been won. But in truth, nothing was yet secure. The treaties of Velasco, signed by Santa Anna under duress, granted independence to Texas. They demanded the withdrawal of all Mexican troops and set the Rio Grande as the border between the two nations. But Mexico's Congress refused to recognize any of it. Santa Anna was just one man, they argued. A captive general could not dictate the future of a nation. And so, while Texas celebrated, the threat of invasion still loomed like a dark shadow over its southern border. Inside the new republic, uncertainty reigned. The revolution had united farmers, merchants, ranchers, frontiersmen, and outlaws under one cause: independence. But with that cause fulfilled, divisions quickly surfaced. The idea of a free Texas meant different things to different people. Some envisioned a sovereign, self-reliant republic. Others saw Texas as the next great American state, destined to join the Union. Some fought for liberty. Others fought to defend slavery. At the center of the chaos stood Sam Houston, wounded at San Jacinto, now hailed as the founding father of Texas. Houston took office as the Republic's first president in October 1836. He was a skilled orator, a seasoned soldier, and a political survivor. He had once lived among the Cherokee. He had served under Andrew Jackson, and now he was tasked with building a government from the rubble of war. The capital was moved to Columbia, then briefly to Houston, a city named in his honor. But buildings alone could not hold a nation together. The Republic of Texas was bankrupt. Its army was unpaid, undisciplined, and at times mutinous. Its borders were undefined, its economy primitive, and its future uncertain. Houston faced challenges from every direction. In the west, Comanche and Kiowa raiders attacked settlements, resisting the spread of Texian control into their ancestral lands. The Republic lacked the military strength to hold its frontier. Treaties were made and broken. Blood was spilled in endless cycles. To the south, Mexico still refused to concede. Raiding parties crossed the Rio Grande. Santa Anna, once captive, was released under pressure from the United States and returned to power. His pride was wounded, his reputation stained, but his hatred for Texas burned brighter than ever. War, he promised, would return, and from the east came political pressure. The United States watched Texas with interest, but hesitation. Many Americans supported the revolution. Some had even fought in it. But annexation of Texas risked war with Mexico and further deepened the national divide over slavery. Texas permitted slavery. It had been one of the rallying cries of rebellion. Mexico had outlawed it, and many Anglo settlers saw that as an attack on their way of life. In the new republic, slavery was enshrined in the Constitution. Enslaved people would have no rights, no citizenship, and no path to freedom. This decision placed Texas firmly within the pro-slavery camp, aligning it with the American South and alienating many in the North. It also exposed the Republic's greatest vulnerability: it could not survive alone. Its economy depended on cotton, trade, and land speculation. Its defense relied on volunteers and borrowed weapons. Its legitimacy required international recognition, but few nations were willing to extend it. Texas was an idea, a symbol of rebellion, but in reality, it was fragile. Houston knew this, and so he pushed for annexation. He believed Texas should join the United States, not immediately, but soon. He saw no future in isolation, but not all agreed. Vice President Mirabeau B. Lamar, who would later succeed Houston, held a different vision. He believed Texas should remain independent, expand westward, and carve out its own destiny, an empire stretching to the Pacific. Lamar also took a harder stance toward native nations. Where Houston had sought peace and diplomacy, Lamar pursued removal and war. Under his presidency, the Republic launched brutal campaigns against the Cherokee and Comanche, displacing thousands, igniting new cycles of violence and widening the gap between settlers and native peoples. The government of Texas swung between these competing visions. One president sought stability through diplomacy. The next demanded glory through conquest. The result was confusion, bloodshed, and instability. Meanwhile, the people endured. They built homes from logs and mud. They planted crops in uncertain soil. They traded what little they had. They raised flags over schoolhouses and courtrooms. They lived in a land with no guarantees, under a flag that few outside recognized. And yet, they believed in the dream of Texas. Some believed because they had fought for it. Others believed because they had nothing else. But belief alone could not fill an empty treasury. The Republic's finances were in shambles. To pay off war debts and fund the government, Texas issued paper currency, promissory notes backed by land and future taxes. These notes, called redbacks, quickly lost value. Inflation soared. Bartering returned. Even basic supplies became scarce. The army, too, became a source of chaos. Without regular pay or supplies, many soldiers turned to raiding, looting, or desertion. Some joined independent militias. Others became bandits. The line between protector and predator blurred. Houston, returning for a second term in 1841, tried to rein in the chaos. He cut military spending, sought peace with Mexico, and resumed talks with the United States. But by then, the Republic was already unraveling. Mexico, sensing weakness, launched new incursions. In 1842, Mexican forces under General Rafael Vázquez briefly seized San Antonio. Panic swept the Republic. Citizens feared a full-scale invasion. Once again, settlers fled. Once again, Texas trembled. In response, the Texian government authorized punitive raids into Mexico. One such raid, the ill-fated Mir expedition, ended in disaster. More than 200 Texians were captured, marched to Mexico, and many were executed. In a grim lottery known as the Black Bean episode, one in every 10 prisoners was selected for death by drawing a black bean from a jar. The cruelty stunned the Republic, but also revealed its limits. Texas could not defend itself. It could not retaliate effectively, and it could not escape the looming truth. Survival required allies. By 1844, momentum for annexation returned. Sam Houston again lobbied the United States, this time with more success. American. Expansionists saw Texas as the gateway to the West. Southern politicians saw it as another slave state, and President John Tyler, eager to cement his legacy, pushed for union. In 1845, after nearly a decade of political maneuvering, the United States Congress approved the annexation of Texas. On December 29th, Texas officially joined the Union. For some, it was a triumph, a long-awaited embrace by the nation they had always seen as kin. For others, it was betrayal, a surrender of the independence they had fought so hard to achieve. But there was no going back. The Republic of Texas was dissolved, its flag lowered, its debts absorbed, its boundaries redefined, and Mexico, furious at the annexation, broke diplomatic ties with the United States. The two nations stood on the brink of war. The Texas Revolution had ended in victory, but the peace that followed was a mirage. Within a year, American and Mexican forces would clash along the Rio Grande. The Mexican-American War would erupt, bloody, brutal, and transformative. And once again, the soil of Texas would be soaked with blood. But in that narrow window of independence, Texas had carved out a unique place in history. A republic born of rebellion, a nation forged in chaos, a people divided by visions of freedom and ambition. They had overthrown an empire, built a government from scratch, defied famine, invasion, and political collapse. And though their republic lasted only 9 years, its legacy would shape the destiny of a continent. The aftermath of revolution had not brought peace. It brought storms, political, cultural, and spiritual. But it also brought identity. Texans, for better or worse, had become a people unto themselves. Not merely Americans, not Mexicans, something new, something forged in the fires of revolution and hardened in the crucible of chaos. History tends to preserve the moments of triumph, the stunning victories, the last stands, the bold declarations. But true legacy is found in the quiet aftermath, in the broken pieces that remain once the cheers fade and the banners fall. The Texas Revolution was brief in time, yet vast in consequence, and the world it left behind would never be the same. When the Republic of Texas emerged in 1836, it was not the end of conflict. It was the beginning of something far more complicated. A new nation had been born from rebellion, but its survival was anything but guaranteed. Its economy was unstable. Its government was fragile. Its enemies had not disappeared. They had only withdrawn, wounded and bitter. Mexico refused to recognize Texas independence. In the halls of Mexico City, the revolution was not over. It was an insult yet to be answered. Santa Anna, though a prisoner of war, would eventually return to power. And though defeated at San Jacinto, his ambition did not die with that battle. For years, the threat of Mexican reinvasion loomed like a storm over the southern horizon. The border was a line drawn in defiance, not in peace. Inside Texas, the new republic was divided. Leaders who had stood together in battle now clashed over how to rule. Should Texas remain an independent nation or seek annexation into the United States? Should it embrace federalism or centralize its authority? These questions stirred bitter rivalries and ignited political chaos. Sam Houston, hailed as the hero of San Jacinto, became the first president of the republic, but he faced fierce opposition from men like Mirabeau B. Lamar, who believed Texas should remain sovereign and expand westward at any cost. Houston favored diplomacy and restraint. Lamar pushed for war and conquest. Under Lamar's presidency, the Republic embarked on a brutal campaign against the Comanche and other indigenous nations, seeking to claim control over all lands between the Rio Grande and the Red River. These policies would define the tone of the new republic: aggressive, expansionist, and uncompromising. The dream of liberty had birthed a state that would stop at nothing to fulfill its vision of dominion. For the indigenous peoples of Texas, the revolution marked the beginning of the end. Under Spanish and Mexican rule, their survival had been precarious but not impossible. Treaties had been signed, trade routes maintained, and some semblance of coexistence had been achieved, but the Republic of Texas had no such intent. Anglo settlers, empowered by the victory, began seizing lands at an accelerating pace. The frontier became a battleground, not just of armies, but of survival itself. The Comanche, once feared lords of the plains, launched desperate raids to defend their territory. But with each passing year, their power was diminished. Disease, military campaigns, and relentless pressure drove them from their lands. By the time Texas joined the United States, the fate of the native nations had already been sealed. And yet the legacy of the revolution extended far beyond Texas itself. In 1845, the Republic of Texas was annexed into the United States. This act, celebrated by many Texans, was viewed by Mexico as an act of war. Less than a year later, American and Mexican forces clashed in a disputed zone along the Rio Grande. The Mexican-American War had begun, a direct consequence of the Texas Revolution. The war would end in 1848 with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. The results were staggering. Mexico ceded over half its national territory, lands that would become California, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, and parts of Colorado and Wyoming. The United States emerged as a continental power. Manifest destiny, once a slogan, became a reality. But the price of expansion was steep. The annexation of Texas as a slave state deepened the sectional divide in the United States. Northern abolitionists saw it as a victory for the slave power, the Southern elite seeking to extend slavery westward. Southern leaders viewed Texas as a buffer, a stronghold to preserve their way of life. The ideological battle lines were drawn. The seeds of the Civil War were already in the soil. The contradiction was clear. Texas had fought for freedom, yet preserved human bondage. The revolution's rhetoric of liberty excluded the enslaved, the indigenous, and the Tejanos, who had once stood beside the rebels. Many Tejanos who had fought for independence found themselves persecuted, their land taken, their loyalty questioned. They were betrayed by the very republic they had helped to create. Still, for Anglo-Americans and future generations, the Texas Revolution became mythologized. The Alamo, though a defeat, became a symbol of martyrdom. San Jacinto became a template of divine victory. Sam Houston was lionized. William Travis, James Bowie, and Davy Crockett were sanctified. Textbooks, monuments, and films would transform the messy, violent truth into a tale of heroes and destiny. But reality is always more complex. The Texas Revolution was not a clean war of independence. It was a collision of cultures, systems, and visions for the future. It was a war born out of conflicting promises, of land, of power, of freedom, and it unleashed a chain of events that reshaped North America. Its echoes can be heard in the rise of the American West, in the fall of indigenous nations, in the scars of the Mexican psyche, and in the lingering tensions over race, identity, and memory. It shaped the borderlands not just with geography, but with blood and ideology. Yet despite its contradictions, or perhaps because of them, the revolution became foundational to the Texan identity. There emerged a belief, often romanticized, in independence, self-reliance, and exceptionalism. Texans came to see themselves as distinct, forged in the fire of revolution. The Lone Star became more than a symbol. It became a cultural brand, a way of being, a legacy passed down through generations. Even today, the cry, "Remember the Alamo," still resonates in politics, in protest, in pride. And so, the legacy of the Texas Revolution endures, not because it was pure, but because it was powerful. Not because it was just, but because it was transformative. It reminds us that history is rarely a tale of good versus evil. It is often a story of ambition versus order, of belief versus reality. It is a canvas painted with sacrifice, stained by injustice, and framed by ideals that are both noble and flawed. In the end, the Texas Revolution was more than a regional rebellion. It was a turning point in the story of nations. It shaped a state. It altered an empire. It changed the course of a continent. And it reminds us that the price of freedom, whatever form it takes, is never paid just once. It is a cost borne across generations. Its legacy is carved not only in stone, but in the soul of a people who still call themselves Texans, not just by birth, but by belief, by memory, by myth, And that legacy, like the land they fought for, endures. The Texas Revolution was not just a battle of guns and flags. It was a war of identity, of belonging, of sacrifice. The men and women who stood in defiance, against overwhelming odds, against empire, against fear, did so believing that freedom was worth any cost. Some paid with their lives, others paid with their futures, all paid with their courage. And now their story rests in your hands. If their struggle moved you, if their legacy inspired you, if you believe history must be remembered, not forgotten, then join us in keeping their memory alive. Subscribe to this channel. Share this documentary with others who hunger to understand the past. And leave a comment to tell us, what does freedom mean to you? Because stories like these are not just history. They are warnings. They are lessons. They are echoes from the past, calling out to the present. Stand with us in honoring those who defied tyranny, who carved a nation from chaos, and who proved that even the smallest voice can shape the destiny of millions. This is not the end. This is remembrance. And remembrance is power.